Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is Dawood-Idrees. Part of the lesson in the beginning is not recorded, so I will be supplementing it once again with the explanation of the creed of Imam al-Tahawi, explained by Sheikh Salih al-Fawzan, Hafidhullah, and translated, and the lesson given by Abu Talha, Rahimahullah.
And the grave, al-qabr, the grave is a barzakh. The grave is an intermediate stage between this world and the hereafter. And the meaning of barzakh is a separation between two things. The grave is a barzakh, as occurs in the ayah that the Shaykh will mention. The grave is described as a barzakh. And then he said in the language, the barzakh, it means a separation between two things. It's a place of separation or period of separation between this life and the next life. Then he quotes the ayah, وَمِن وَرَائِهِمْ بَرْزَخٌ إِلَى يَوْمِ يُبْعَثُونَ. Surah Al-Mu'minun, the 23rd surah, ayah 100. With the explanation, and behind them there is a barrier right until the day when they will be resurrected. The people who have died, they have a barrier preventing them from coming back into this life. A barzakh, a separation or a barrier. Shaykh al-Fawzan said, so the grave, the qabr, the grave is a waiting place. And after it, the people will move on to the resurrection and the reckoning. So Ibn al-Qayyim, rahimahullah, he mentions that the abodes, the places where the people live, the abodes are three. The first abode is Dawood-Dunya, is the abode of this world. And that is a place of action and earning, whether it be good or evil. The actual word in the printed text here is وَالْكَسْبْ مِنْ خَيْرٍ أَوْ شَرَفٍ, which would be translated as that this abode, the abode of this world, is a place of action and of earning good deeds or nobility. And it seems, wallahu alam, there's a slight printing error, wallahu alam. It could be correct that way, that in this world a person earns good or nobility. But it seems more likely, wallahu alam, that there's a fa been put in which should not be there, and it should be min khayrin aw shar. That this world is an abode, is a place of action and of earning actions, whether good or evil. Wallahu alam. So that's the first abode, the abode of this world, which is a place of action. Then he mentions, Ibn al-Qayyim mentions the second abode, which is Dar al-Barzakh, the intermediate stage. And that is a temporary abode, meaning the grave, after a person's died and put in his grave. That's the second abode, second place he's going to live in the intermediate stage, which is a temporary abode. And therefore, those who say mathwahul akhir have made a mistake. He mentions this phrase which people use in Arabic, and they also use the same phrase in English, when they talk about someone who's died, that they say he's gone to his final resting place. And Shaykh al-Fawzan said this is a mistake. He's gone to his grave, he's been buried. This is a mistake. When you say about someone who's been buried, that he's gone to his final resting place, this is wrong. Because the grave is not the final resting place. As Muslims, we believe the grave is not the final resting place, it's just a temporary passing stage. The final resting place is what comes next, which is the third abode, Darul Qirar, or Darul Qarar, the abode of settling, the settling place. And that is paradise or the fire. One of those two, only one of those two. The final abode, the place of settling, is paradise or the fire. Then he quotes the ayah, وَإِنَّ الْآخِرَةَ هِيَ دَارُ الْقَرَارِ, Surah Ghafir, the 40th surah, ayah 39. With the explanation And the hereafter, that is the abode of remaining forever. Then Shaykh al-Fawzan said, discussing the matter of the grave, he said, so when the deceased is placed in his grave and he is buried and the people depart and leave him and he hears the sound of their footsteps as occurs in the hadith, then his soul is returned to his body. And this is an intermediate life, meaning when the people have left him after burying him, his soul is put back in his body and he's now given life again. Hayatun barzakhiyya, an intermediate, a life in the intermediate stage, which is known only to Allah, is not known, this life of the intermediate stage is not known except to Allah. And Allah has full power and ability over everything. So after his soul is returned to his body and he is given life again, then 2 angels come to him and ask him 3 questions. Man rabbuk, wa ma dinuk, wa man nabiyyuk. Who is your Lord? And what is your religion? And who was your prophet? In a footnote they mention this occurs as part of the long hadith. They mention it's a hadith reported by Ahmad and Abu Dawood and Al-Hakim, and this hadith, a long hadith about what happens when the person is placed in his grave, is a long hadith declared sahih, authentic by Shaykh al-Albani, which mentions the coming of the 2 angels to him. So Shaykh al-Fawzan said, they come and they ask the person in his grave, who is your Lord? And what is your religion? And who is your prophet? So if he gives a correct answer, then he will succeed and prosper. And his grave will become a garden from the gardens of paradise. And then on the day of resurrection, he will become an inhabitant of paradise, of Jannah. But if he fails in his answer and does not respond, then his grave will become a pit from the pits of the hellfire. And his grave will be crushed inwards upon him until his ribs cross over. Whereas the first person, the person who gives the correct response to the angels, his grave is made spacious for him to such an extent that it's made as far, as wide as the eye can see. And a gate will be opened for him from paradise. And its breeze and fragrance will come to him. Whereas this one, the second one, the one who gives the wrong answer to the angels, he will be squashed in his grave until his ribs intertwine. And then a gate of the fire will be opened for him, so that its heat and its fiercely hot wind come upon him. Wal Iyaad billah, and Allah's refuge is sought. So the correct answer, the correct response, is that by which Allah will make the person who says it firm, which is to say, Rabbi Allah, wa dini al-Islam, wa Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. The correct response in the grave is, my Lord is Allah, my religion is Islam, and my prophet is Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Then Shaykh al-Fawzan quotes the ayah, يُثَبِّتُ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا بِالْقَوْلِ الثَّابِتِ فِي الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ. Surah Ibrahim, the 14th surah, ayah 27. With the explanation, Allah will make firm those who have Iman. Allah will make the believers firm with the firm saying in the life of this world and in the hereafter. Then Shaykh al-Fawzan finishes by saying, explaining why Allah makes the person firm in the grave, the believer makes the believer firm in the grave and gives him this correct answer. He says, this is because of his having Iman in Allah and His Messenger. It is not, the reason that a person in the grave gives the correct answer, that's the reason. Because before he had Iman in Allah and His Messenger. It is not on account of his having learnt it or gained it through intelligence. It's not enough to just a person, he reads it in a kafir reads a piece of paper, reads what the answer is going to be, then in the grave he's learnt it so he can give the correct answer in the grave. No, not at all. He said, a person giving a correct answer in the grave will not be from that. It won't be because he's learnt it or because he's gained it through some intelligence. He said, so whoever does not have Iman, whoever does not have true faith, then he will stumble in answering. And that is the believer, that is the hypocrite. That is the hypocrite, the munafiq, who makes an outward show of Iman in this world and hides unbelief. Then he will not be able to answer. He will say, He'll say, oh, I don't know. I heard the people saying something, so I said it. Then he will be struck with an iron club and produce a sound which is heard by everything, except for mankind. And if mankind heard that, they would faint. وَيُضِلُّ اللَّهُ الظَّالِمِينَ وَيَفْعَلُ اللَّهُ مَا يَشَاءُ. The next part of the same ayah, Surah Ibrahim, the 14th surah, ayah 27, with the explanation, and Allah leads the wrongdoers astray, and Allah does whatever He wishes. In the wrongdoing unbelievers in the grave, they will not be able to answer correctly. And that's where Shaykh al-Fawzan ends explanation of this point. And the next point, which we'll leave till next time, again, it does continue with regard to the affair of the grave. And just finally, as a couple of side points, Shaykh al-Albani, rahimahullah, mentions in his small notes, with regard to this point here, وَبِعَذَابِ الْقَبْرِ وَبِعَذَابِ الْقَبْرِ لِمَنْ كَانَ لَهُ أَهْلًا. And that we have Iman in the punishment of the grave for those who are deserving of it. Shaykh al-Albani said, meaning the unbelievers, the kuffar, and the fusaq al-muslimin, and the sinful Muslims. The first of these is clearly and definitely stated in the texts of the Qur'an. The unbelievers being punished in the grave is clearly stated in the Qur'an. And the explainer of Tahaawiyyah, Ibn Abil Izz, he mentions some of the ayahs which clearly show punishment in the grave. Amongst them, the ayahs with regard to the Fir'aun and his people, Surah Ghafir, the 40th surah, ayahs 45 to 47. Ayahs 45 to 47 from Surah Ghafir. Ayahs 45 and 46 from Surah Ghafir, which mention clearly about the punishment of Fir'aun after death, in the grave, and then on the day of judgment as well. And also from Surah Tur, Surah Tur, the 52nd surah, ayahs 45 to 47. That there is mentioned in these ayahs the punishment of the grave. So back to what Shaykh al-Albani mentioned, he said, so with regard to the punishment of the unbelievers in the grave, then this is clearly and definitely stated in the Qur'an. And as for the other affair, the punishment of Muslims in the grave for certain sins, then that is stated in many ahadith, which reach the level of being mutawatir, as the explainer, Ibn Abil Izz, mentioned, and others as well. So it is obligatory to have belief, to have aqeedah in that. However, we do not delve into how it will be. I mean, how the punishment of the grave, how it is, how it happens, we don't delve into that. Since the intellect has no way to come across how it will be, and the texts of the legislation do not come with anything that is impossible in the intellect. However, they may come with something that cannot be comprehended by the intellect. That's an important principle that Shaykh al-Albani brings that some people don't understand, that the texts of Islam, the book and the Sunnah, they never come with something that's totally impossible in the intellect. That doesn't happen. However, they may mention something which can't be comprehended, can't be reached by our intellects. So he said, so therefore it is obligatory to submit to that. Then he refers to the explanation of Ibn Abil Izz for some of those ahadith with regard to the punishment of the grave. And he said, and also you can refer to the book As-Sunnah of Ibn Abi Asim, hadith numbers 863 to 877. Then with regard to a final point, with regard to the narrations about the two angels who come and question the person in the grave. Then Shaykh al-Albani mentioned, this is something mutawatir. As we have just mentioned, I mean, the fact that there will be questioning in the grave is also something reported in many, many narrations that reach the level of being mutawatir. Except for the naming of the two angels as Munkar and Nakir. Then that occurs in a hadith whose chain of narration is Hasan, is good, which I have mentioned in As-Sahihah as hadith number 1391. I mean, the fact that there will be questioning in the grave is mutawatir. There's so many hadith that mention that. But as for the actual names of those two angels, then that is not mutawatir, but it does occur in a hadith which is Hasan, which is good. The hadith reported by Tirmidhi, which is mentioned at the start of the wording. There's a hadith of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu who said, Allah's Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, when the deceased is placed in his grave, or he said, when one of you is placed in his grave, two angels who are black with blue eyes come. One of them is called Al-Munkar, and the other one is called An-Nakir. So that hadith that's in At-Tirmidhi, and Shaykh al-Albani mentions the hadith is Hasan, is good, actually names those two angels, Al-Munkar and An-Nakir. Alhamdulillah. And just as a final point, then the explainer Ibn Abil Izz, then when he mentions the long hadith about the questioning in the grave, and then he makes the point, he says, and what is necessitated by this hadith, meaning belief in the punishment of the grave, this is held by all of the people of the Sunnah and the Hadith. All the people of Sunnah and Hadith agree with that. They hold that as their belief, that there will be punishment in the grave. As a further side point, Abu Hasan al-Ash'ari, he mentions that the only ones who disagree about that were the Khawarij and some of the Mu'tazila. They disagree about punishment in the grave. As for the rest of the people of Islam, then they agree, they believe, they hold that as their belief. There will be punishment, there will be questioning and punishment in the grave. Walhamdulillah, wa sallallahu ala Muhammad. Any points of clarification? What occurs here, it mentions, he says, Ma nabiyuk. As the brother just pointed out, as occurs in this word, as occurs in the book, when it mentions the three questions in the grave, as it occurs here, it's mentioned, Man Rabbuk, wa ma dinuk, wa ma nabiyuk. Who is your Lord, and what is your religion, and what is your prophet? Wallahu a'lam.
Is there any truth in the belief that the angels are on your shoulders? You know, they say there's an angel on your right shoulder.
Allahu a'lam. Allah. And with regard to the belief that the angels are on your shoulders or the light, Allah, as Shaykh al-Fawzan said, these are matters of the hidden and the unseen, matters of the ghaib. Obviously, the angels are here right now. With every brother and every sister, the angels are here. But we don't see them, we don't feel them, we don't feel them with our senses. So the only way for us to know about them is through the text of the book and the sunnah. So whatever occurs in the text and the book and the sunnah, then we affirm it. Whatever is in addition to that, for example, being on the shoulders or not, if it's not mentioned in a text, then we just keep quiet about it. Wallahu a'lam. One thing that Ibn Abil-Iz mentions, and some of the Salaf mention, is the point, it's an important point, that the angels, they change over at the time of Fajr and at the time of Asr. The four angels who are with you in the night, they change over at Fajr time. And then the ones who are with you in the day, they change over in the evening at the Asr time. They change over with the other four angels, and they take their place. So Ibn Abil-Iz mentions that point, and it's a point mentioned from some of the Salaf, and they mention it from an authentic hadith reported by Muslim that mentions that point. The hadith from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in fact, Shaykh al-Albani mentions it's a hadith which is agreed upon. It's not just in Sahih Muslim, it's a hadith of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, reported by Al-Bukhari and Muslim, with the wording that the angels take turns with you. The angels of the night and the angels of the day take turns with you, take turns in guarding you. And they gather together at the dawn prayer, the Fajr prayer, and at the Asr prayer. So the ones who are with you, they then ascend. And they ask them, or rather, and He asks them, Allah asks them, and Allah knows better. Allah asks them, but He already knows the answer. How have you left my servants? So they say, we came to them whilst they were praying, and we left them whilst they were praying. Angels, they come to you at Fajr time, while you're praying the Fajr prayer. And then that's the angels of the day. Then they stay with you the whole day, guarding you until Asr prayer. And then the other angels come down and swap over. Then the angels of the night come to your Asr prayer. They come to you while you're praying. And they depart from you at the Fajr prayer. So that's why the angels give the answer to Allah the Most High, that we came to our servants when they were praying and we left them while they were praying. Hadith reported by Al-Bukhari and Muslim. The four angels, they come and they swap with the other four angels. With regard to what happens at the point of death, then it's found in the long hadith of Al-Bara ibn Azib radiallahu anhuma, the hadith, and the hadith that was indicated and reported by Abu Dawood, which is a long, long hadith, what happens when the person dies. That when the person dies, then how the angels take his soul. And if he's a believer, if he's a righteous person, the angels, they take his soul and they take him through the heavens and they put upon him shrouds and perfume, and they take him through the heavens, one heaven after the other. And the hadith is a long hadith. Until the point when it's the time for him when he's buried. That's when he dies, until it's when it's time for him to be buried. And he's buried, the people have buried him, and they've left him. Then his soul is put back in his body. And then the angels come and question him. And likewise the long hadith mentions, as for the evildoer, the hypocrite and the unbeliever, then their soul is torn out of their body like an iron skewer. A hot iron skewer is pulled through wool. It has to be dragged out. It's dragged, the soul of the unbeliever is dragged from his body until it's dragged out, and then it's stinking and it's evil smelling, and the angels they throw it in rough sackcloth, and they throw it, and it's refused entry through the heavens, and it's thrown back down, and so on to the end of the hadith, and then he's questioned in his grave. Shaykh Al-Albani, obviously, he brings the hadith in his book, Ahkam al-Janaiz. He gathers the different wordings of the hadith all in one long narration. You can find the hadith. The hadith has been translated as well. And the basis of the hadith occurs in Abu Dawood. With regard to the crushing in the grave, as for what the Shaykh mentioned with regard to the unbelievers, that in their grave they're tortured and tormented, and their ribs are made to crush over, and their torment continues in the grave. But as for the believers, then no doubt there's the authentic narration. In fact, there's a number of authentic narrations that even the believers, when they're first put in their grave, then the grave is made to squash them. The grave squashes even the believer initially, and then it relaxes. There's likewise a hadith of Sa'ad ibn Mu'adh, radiallahu anhu, that even he, the like of him, even he was squashed in his grave. Even that noble righteous companion, the authentic narration mentions, even he was squashed in his grave, and then then released. So it's part of our belief that the believer, even the believer, when he's first put in his grave, then the grave is made to squash him, and then he's released. There's a number of narrations which Shaykh Al-Albani, rahimahullah, declares authentic in that regard. With the word, indeed the grave, indeed there is a crushing for the grave, and other wordings as well. The samum, the heat of as for the unbeliever in his grave, then a gate is open to the fire, so the heat of it comes to him, and also the wind of it, the breathing wind, the fierce breathing out of the fire, the wind of the fire. Likewise, some of the people of knowledge, they mention, what about a person who is not buried? For example, he dies in an explosion, his body's scattered all over the place, or somebody's burnt, or somebody drowns in the sea. And the people of knowledge, they mention that the punishment of the grave, it applies to them as well. The punishment of the grave, it still applies to them. And a primary evidence for that is the ayah with regard to Fir'aun. Fir'aun was drowned in the ocean, and then his body was preserved. He wasn't buried at that time in a grave, and yet still the ayah refers to punishment of the grave for Fir'aun and his people, those who were drowned in the sea. So punishment of the grave still applies. And as Shaykh Fawzan mentioned, how, Allahu A'lam, how and so on. We don't know how, but it happens to them. With regard to affairs, as we mentioned before, with regard to affairs of the soul, then we know very little of the affairs of the soul. And amongst those who have spoken about the affairs of the soul is Ibn al-Qayyim, rahimahullah. He mentions that with regard to people in their graves, he mentions in his book Ar-Ruh and elsewhere, he mentions that as for the soul, that we know very little about, we know only about the soul, that which occurs in text. He mentioned that when people are alive, then the soul is has a very strong connection with the body. But when you're alive, your soul is basically where your body is, very strongly. When you sleep, that connection is released. It's relaxed. So when you sleep, and sleep being a minor form of death, then the soul is released to some extent. But it still has quite a strong relation to the body, to the extent as Sheikh Uthaymeen, rahimahullah, also mentioned that when you wake a person who's sleeping, very quickly he awakes. His soul is returned very quickly to him. But when a person dies, There's still a connection with his body, but that connection is even weaker. There's a very weak connection with his body. So they mention, as is shown by the authentic narrations, that the souls of martyrs or the souls of the believers will be in green birds in paradise. But still having a connection with the bodies, but a weak connection. And beyond that, Allahu A'lam. Allahu A'lam.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is Dawood-Idrees. Now the rest of the lesson will continue as usual. The explanation of Aqeedah, Tahaawiyyah, read by Iyaad, Amjad, Rafiq. The first lesson that was provided in the beginning, that was translated and taught by Abu Talha, rahimahullah, will be linked in the description, inshallah.
And this is when there will be paradise and hellfire, and so all of the body and the soul is complete, and the senses are much more complete and perfect. So these were the 4 different levels of connection between the soul and the body. It starts off at the weakest level, which is in the womb, after the soul is breathed in, and it reaches its perfection in the hereafter. In the hereafter, after resurrection. So this brings us to today's lesson, where we just want to quickly finish off the discussion about the soul and the body with 1 or 2 points, or with 1 point. And this point is to do with, is the punishment of the grave, is it general to every faction of the ummah, or is it only to some factions of the ummah? For example, does it apply to those who have reached the age of responsibility? Right, the age of where they have the obligations upon them, the children, or does it apply only to the people who are under obligation? Who are under obligation to respond to the Sharia commands. And so this question applies to, let's say someone dies as a child and he hasn't reached the age, or she hasn't reached the age of maturity, or maybe someone was mad in the sense that majnoon, or they're not able to really think and reason and make choices. Do they come under the punishment of the grave? And the answer to this is that those who haven't reached or do not have the status of taklif, which is they are bound by the obligations in the Sharia, then their situation follows the situation of their fathers. So if their fathers were Muslimin, then they will be from the people of paradise. So the children of the Muslimin, they will be from the people of paradise. Those who die as children without having reached the age of maturity. And this is because the children are deemed to be upon fitrah. They're upon the fitrah and they're following the parents who are upon Islam. And in that situation, the child, good deeds are written for him. So for example, if a child under the age of maturity is doing good deeds, like for example reciting the Quran, or any other good deed, obedience to parents and things of that nature which they are able to do, then they get written for them, written for them is a good deed. But as for the evil deeds, the Iyaad, then they are not responsible for them because they haven't reached the age of taklif. So therefore, the evil deeds are not written for them, against them. And so in essence, from this discussion we understand that for the children who die upon the fitrah, children of the Muslimin, the asal is that they will receive bliss and reward in the grave. This is the asal, this is the foundation. However, there is a statement of the Prophet ﷺ in which he made a supplication for a child to be saved from the punishment of the grave. To be saved from the punishment of the grave. Now this raises an issue, that are children punished in the grave? And how do we understand this particular narration which is in the Muwatta of Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala? So regarding this, or to explain this, the scholars have 2 views. The first view is that yes, the child will or can receive the punishment of the grave, just as he receives the reward and the bliss in the grave. And this is on the basis that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows what that child would turn into and what he or she would do if he was to, if he remained alive and, grew old. This is a view of a faction of the people of Ahlul Sunnah. However, the second view and the most correct view is that the punishment referred to in that hadith is not the punishment of the grave, as we commonly understand. It's not for punishment for sins, because as we've already established, this is a principle, a firmly established principle, that the young child who dies before maturity, or the mad person, the person who does not have the ability to think and reason, then evil deeds have not been written against them to begin with. Why? Because they are not mukallaf, they are not under taklif, they are not obligated to abide by the Sharia obligations. Right? Because this is a principle in the Sharia. So therefore, when they die, there is no evil deeds written against them to begin with, such that they should be punished in the grave for those deeds. However, and this is a firmly established principle in the Sharia, because the pen is raised, as you know, from the young person, the person who is asleep, and the person who is, who is mad. So what does this mean then? What is the meaning of this supplication made by the Prophet ﷺ? What is meant is that when we speak about the word adhab, the word adhab can apply to many different things. And from those things is that when a person initially goes to the grave compresses. The grave compresses, and this applies to everybody. And this also is a type of punishment. But it is not the punishment that relates to the punishment of the sins and the transgressions and so on and so forth. And this type of punishment obviously is not something that is permanent and is there all the time once a person has entered the grave. Rather, it is only temporary when a person has entered the grave. So it's one of the types of adhab, one of the types of punishment that a person faces and meets when he is in the grave. So this is how they explain this hadith. And so the answer to this is that the children, they are rewarded in the grave, but they are not punished in the grave. And they may receive that punishment which is general, which is the compression of the grave, which nobody can escape. And this is not to be treated to be the same as the other punishment of the grave, which is on account of sins and transgressions for people who reach the age of maturity. So this is the correct view. And this now leads us to the next issue and the next statement in At-Tahawiy's Creed. And this is when he says, وَنُؤْمِنُ بِسُؤَالِ مُنْكَرٍ وَنَكِيرٍ فِي قَبْرِهِ عَنْ رَبِّهِ وَدِينِهِ وَنَبِيِّهِ. That we believe in the questioning of Munkar and Nakir in his grave regarding his Lord and his religion and his Prophet. So here there is mention of Munkar and Nakir. And they are two angels who will come to the dead and they will ask him about his Lord and his religion and his Prophet. And these two, the mention of these two angels, the specific names, there are some scholars say that the names are not firmly established, that it is Munkar and Nakir. But there are some hadith, some which reach the level of Hasan, some which reach the level of being Sahih, that specifically mention their names, that they are Munkar and Nakir. Now the names Munkar and Nakir, the names are such because the word Munkar means rejected, and Nakir means something that is objectionable. And the reason why they are given these names is because in their appearance there is something which is objectionable in their appearance. When a person sees them, they are very stern, they have they are severe and stern, blue-eyed, and they come in the form that a person has not seen before. So it will make him alarmed at what he sees. And so believing in the question of Munkar and Nakir and the questioning is something which has firm evidence in the Sunnah, and we find there are very, very many narrations which have come. There are so many, and so belief in all of this is an obligation. And we see that there are certain groups and factions who have rejected this belief. From them are the Mu'tazila, from them are the people of Kalam in general, amongst them are those. And likewise the philosophers. They reject the punishment of the grave and they say that this is not correct. They deny all of the evidences and then they start interpreting some of the evidences, explaining them away, making ta'wil of some of the texts. And we should look at the reasoning behind that in a short while. But at this point, the people of the Sunnah and Jama'ah, they believe in the punishment of the grave and they make a specific point of mentioning it because, number one, it is from the affairs of the unseen. Number two, the evidences have clearly indicated to it. And number three, because of the existence of these sects who deny these affairs, who deny the punishment of the grave. And so for all of these three reasons, we find that this is something that is repeatedly mentioned in all the books of the creed of the Salaf. So from the issues that are related to this, from the issues, the Masail then, is first of all, the questioning relates to three things. This is the first mas'ala, the first issue. The questioning relates to three affairs: his Lord, his religion, and his Prophet. And the righteous person who is upon Tawheed and who earned good deeds from his Iman, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will inspire him to speak with a firm statement. He will make a firm statement and he will say, Rabbi Allah, my Lord is Allah, wa dini Islam, wa nabiyyi Muhammad. My religion is Islam and my Prophet is Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. As for the fajir, the sinful and munafiq and the hypocrite, he will say, he will exclaim, he will say, he will, exclaim and say, I don't know. I heard the people say something, I said it. And so his answer will not be firm. Either he doesn't know the answer, or he is wavering in his answer. Either he says, I don't know, or he says, well, the people said this, and so I said this. Because he will not be inspired by Allah to speak with a firm statement. And this question, Man Rabbuk, who is your Lord? Notice here that the question is Man Rabbuk, not Man Ilahuk. Man Rabbuk, Rabb, who is your Rabb? And this is because the word Rabb, it can also mean Ilah. Al-Rububiyyah can also mean Uluhiyyah. When Rabb is mentioned on its own in the Quran, it also includes Ilah, it also includes Uluhiyyah. And likewise with Ilah. When we say Ilah, Ilah means that which is worshipped, but it includes within it Ar-Rabb, all of the qualities and aspects of Rububiyyah. And likewise the other way around. When we say Ar-Rabb, the Lord, the Creator, the Provider, the Owner, it means Ar-Rabb, but it also incorporates and implies within it Uluhiyyah, meaning He is deserving of worship because He is the Rabb, He is the Creator, the Provider, the Sustainer, and so on and so forth. So both those meanings are present, and so therefore when he says Man Rabbuk, when the question says Man Rabbuk, it means Man Ma'buduk, who is the one that you worshipped? Because otherwise every person who dies and is questioned, the overwhelming majority, they believe in a creator. Everybody, every person from every fraction, from every religion, they believe in a creator. And they will say, my Lord is, the creator. But this is not what is meant. What is meant is, who did you worship? What did you worship? And so therefore we will see that every person will differ on the basis of what he actually worshipped. Our second question is, what is your deen? Ma dinuk? And the deen of Islam is worshipping Allah alone without any partners. So a person will answer with Islam if that was indeed truly his religion. And if he was a worshipper of something else, of idols or some other things, then he will answer with what he used to worship Allah with his deen, whatever his deen was. And likewise, we will see the third question, whom he followed, who is this man? In this case, it is the Prophet ﷺ. And so whoever he followed, whoever he was a follower of, he will answer on the basis of that. Now, this is the first issue. The second issue then is this question only for this ummah, or does it apply to every single ummah? Will every single nation be asked these questions? Who is your Lord? What is your deen? And who was this man who was sent amongst you? And the correct answer, to briefly deal with this issue, the correct answer is that this actually is for every nation. Every nation, the dead from every nation which has passed, they will be asked these questions: who is your Lord? What is your religion? Who is this man sent amongst you? Meaning, who was the prophet that was sent to you? The respective prophet that was sent to each nation. The third issue is that the question relates to the Munkar and Nakir, the questions that they make. Does it apply to the disbeliever just as it applies to the believer? Because remember, the person who outwardly affirms Islam consists of the believer, mu'min, and the munafiq. Both of them, outwardly, they have the label of Islam. So there will be no doubt, they'll be asked in the question, who is your Lord? What is your religion? Who is this man? So the believer, the genuine believer, will answer correctly. And the hypocrite will waver and not be able to answer. This leaves the actual disbeliever, the kafir. This is the one who dies upon disbelief. What about him? Will the questions be posed to him as well? And the answer to this is that in the various narrations which have come, we find that in some narrations it says fajir, which would mean like a sinful person. We have munafiq, which is a hypocrite, and we also have in some narrations kafir, disbeliever. And so all of them are present, and so therefore it means that every faction and every person will be asked this question. It is not unique only to the people who ascribe to Islam outwardly, at least in the life of this world. So this then is the issue of the questioning. This leads us to the next statement of Imam al-Tahaawi rahimahullah ta'ala, and this is وَالْقَبَرُ رَوْضَةٌ مِنْ رِيَاضِ الْجَنَّةِ أَوْ حُفْرَةٌ مِنْ حُفَرِ النِّيرَانِ, which means that the grave is either a paradise, either a garden from the gardens of paradise, or it is a pit from the pits of hellfire. So this now is another belief on top of the punishment of the grave and on top of the questioning of the grave, in the grave. This now is another belief, which is that the grave itself is either a garden for the deceased or it is a pit for the deceased. And the reason why this has been specifically mentioned and made a point of belief is because of the rationalists, the people who believe that the intellect and reason is the ultimate foundation of everything, of all knowledge, is that they say that, look, when we open the grave, if we dig up the grave and we empty the grave, what do we see? We don't see any effects of any reward. We don't see any greenery. We don't see any fruits. We don't see anything like that. And likewise, if we were to dig up the grave, we don't see any effects, burning effects. We don't see any fire. We don't see any charcoal. We don't see any. There's nothing that we can see that indicates anything of punishment. And so, we see We don't see any effect at all. So what they are doing here, now this is a crucial point to understand, which is that in raising this objection, what they've really done is that they've tried to understand the unseen in light of what is seen. Right? So what they see and observe, so we see fire, we see bliss, we see things that we can physically see, and we use that to make an analogy for that which we cannot see, and then they assume that the two have to be like for like. They have to work in exactly the same way. They assume that what is visible to the living person with his eyes and the vision, whatever the spectrum of vision is, that somehow in the barzakh and in the life for the deceased, that somehow this has to work in the same way. Such that if we dug the grave, we should physically be able to see the dead being rewarded or punished. And this analogy, and the basis of this analogy is false and futile. Why? Because the scene, what we see in the life of this world, is completely different to what we cannot see. And this also shows that they wrongly believe that the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this universe is all one single thing. Right? Meaning that what we see, what we perceive, all of creation works in the same way and is the same. And this is incorrect. This is also incorrect. This is also because of a corrupt and false analogy. Rather, we see that there is the alimul ghaib, the world that we cannot see. So there are things that we can't see, like the jinn, for example, or we cannot see the angels. They are made of a different material, different matter that is not within our range of perception. It works in different ways. And likewise, there is the alimul shahada, the world that we can see. And in the world that we can see, we see creatures, we see trees, we observe the effects of the wind, we see all of these things that we see. We can observe them, we can study them, we know the rules pertaining to them, but all of this is different to the world that is unseen. And we cannot make analogies for one with the other because that is not how it works. Right? So now we understand that the universe is not uniform. The universe is not uniform. There are things, there is within the universe worlds that we cannot see, that we cannot perceive, that we cannot study, that we cannot detect, that we cannot understand. It's impossible. It's impossible. And it is from reason to believe in this. It is from aql to believe in this. And it opposes reason to disbelieve in this. Opposite to what is claimed by the aqlaniyin and the philosophers and the kuffar, the disbelievers, who believe only in, as they claim, only in what the senses inform them. Only what we can see, perceive, detect, observe, whether with the naked eye or with microscopes or with whatever else, or with telescopes in space. This is false. This is false. It is from reason to believe in the existence of that which is not perceptible. Right? Like the angels and the jinn and whatever else. So therefore, we make a distinction between the life of this world, the life of the barzakh, and paradise and hellfire. And what is obligatory therefore is that a person, he submits and believes, and not to make his intellect, his aql, to be a judge. Now this does not mean that we have denied the use of reason. This does not mean that at all. Unlike what is claimed against the people of the Sunnah by the Ash'aris and the Mu'tazila and the Falasifa and likewise the non-Muslims. This does not mean that at all. Rather, we put intellect in its proper place, recognize its abilities and recognize its limitations. So, this leads us to the next point, and the next point is something that is mentioned often by Shaykhul Islam Ibn Taymiyyah and likewise Ibn al-Qayyim, likewise also the explainer of Tahaawiyyah, Ibn Abil Izz, rahimahumullah, that the Sharia of Islam has come with things that would bewilder the intellect. The Sharia has come and brought things, mentioned things that the intellect would be bewildered by, astounded by, confused by, would be unable to understand. So there are things in the Sharia which have come, which are like that, which would not be able to understand. However, the Sharia has not come with anything that the intellect would deem to be impossible. There is nothing in reason, in intellect, that would make impossible anything which has come in the Sharia. Although at the same time, those things might bewilder a person's reason, might confuse a person, may astound a person. But at the same time, that does not mean that those things are impossible. Now, this is an important point to understand, because in a way we answer the objections of the philosophers and the scientists and the atheists and the disbelievers, just because there are things that they do not grasp and which are astounding to them and unbelievable to them, does not mean that they are impossible. They are two separate things. Something being impossible is one thing, and something being unbelievable, astounding, amazing, bewildering, confusing, that is something else. And so those two are two separate things, and we shouldn't mix those two issues together. So the point that is being made here all along then is that the intellect, reason, there's a verse in the Quran in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, وَاللَّهُ أَخْرَجَكُم مِّن بُطُونِ أُمَّهَاتِكُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ شَيْئًا وَجَعَلَ لَكُمُ السَّمْعَ وَالْأَبْصَارَ وَالْأَفْئِدَةَ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَشْكُرُونَ. That Allah, He brought you out of the wombs of your mothers without you knowing anything. You knew nothing. Then He made for you the faculties of hearing and seeing and understanding, in order that you may be grateful. So these are the means of perception. The ears, the eyes, and the heart, this is the root. Everything that relates to knowledge can only come through the ears or the eyes. What you see and what you hear. That then goes into the heart and the mind. The heart works with the mind to process all of that. And through that, you begin to learn about the world around you. You see things, you make analogies from past experience, and then gradually you build your store of knowledge and wisdom and whatever else. But everything that you are observing is the alimu shahada. Right? So in other words, the aql, the reason and the knowledge which is developing only in relation to the alimu shahada, what you are seeing. Right? There's nothing in your reason that has appeared and developed in relation to the alimul ghaib, because you've never seen that to begin with. So therefore, this shows that the aql, reason, develops and grows in relation to that which is seen, which is observed. Right? And so therefore we can make guesses and analogies for things that can be observed that we have not yet observed. Right? And this is part of scientific knowledge and scientific development and learning about space and stars and things, things that we can learn about through analogy and through investigation. And so that's why we have a lot of knowledge to do with astronomy and stars and space and eclipses and orbits and all of these things. Likewise on Earth, all of the different sciences. This is how we have arrived at knowledge of these things, that we understand some of the basic principles within creation. We can make analogies. Upon those analogies, we can make hypotheses and we can do experiments, and then this is how it all works. Right? So here reason can be employed to better understand and grasp those areas. However, going back to the point that was made earlier, that this reason does not have the capacity to question and deny that which is from the actual unseen, the proper unseen, meaning that which in principle cannot be seen. The alimul ghaib, that in which we find the jinn and the angels and whatever else, the barzakh, right, in the grave and that particular world, right, that intellect cannot be used to deny or reject any of that, because it just simply does not have the capacity. So for that reason, we find that the scholars like Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, they wrote books just built upon this principle that there is no conflict between reason, between aql, and between naql. Naql meaning transmission, which is the Quran and the Sunnah. Naql, what has come through transmission, and aql meaning that which is reason. Right? So built upon this principle, he wrote a book which is called Dar Ta'arud al-Aql wal-Naql, repelling the alleged conflict between reason and revelation. And he wrote this as a refutation of the philosophers and the people of Kalam who claim that there is a conflict between reason and revelation, and then they applied it to the issue of Allah's names and His attributes. And it also applies to other areas as well, like the areas that we are discussing, the belief of in the unseen, like the punishment of the grave and so on and so forth. So he wrote that book upon that very principle. So, and he refuted the Mu'tazila, the rationalists, the falasifa, and other than them. So once we have cleared this principle, once we made that very clear, then we have no doubt. We have no doubt in what has been said, that the qabr, the grave, is either a rawdah, a garden from the gardens of paradise, or it is a hufra, a pit from the pits of hellfire. Because all of this is from the world of the unseen, for which we have no, knowledge, and we are unable to see and observe and study. Now, something that also tells us, something in the life of this world that tells us and indicates this to us, is if you're next to a person who is sleeping, that person in his sleep, in his dream, is either experiencing bliss and pleasure, or is experiencing harm and pain. And you do not know what's happening to that person. And you might even hear that person screaming out, asking for help. Meaning you would physically hear from this person who's next to you sleeping, making noises and saying something because of what they're experiencing in their dreams, what the soul is experiencing. And this shows that this person is in a world that is not the normal world. It's not the normal world. And they're experiencing things. Physically they're experiencing, because clearly if they are seeing something in their dreams and it's affecting the body while they're asleep, and the senses are functioning and they are speaking and they are asking for help, for example, well, this clearly shows that there's a connection between that state of sleep, which is kind of like a minor type of death, a minor type of the barzakh. In a way, it's like it resembles that type of life, and connection to the physical body. Right? That is actually one of the evidences that Ibn al-Qayyim mentions of the plausibility of the connection between the soul and the body in the grave. Because while you are alive, in other words, while you're asleep, and we see that connection clearly, then likewise that connection can exist in the grave as well. So, therefore, in conclusion, what is obligatory in these affairs is to make taslim, is to submit in these unseen affairs and believe just as the evidences have indicated. And that we do not start making analogies with the intellect for the world which is unseen, And we don't start making objections with aql, with reason, against the sharia, because that is founded upon a false principle. The aql doesn't have that capacity to do that to begin with. And it should simply, the intellect should acknowledge that it is limited. That itself is from reason. It is from aql, from reason to acknowledge that aql is limited. And this is where we differ, again, with the falasifa and the malahida, the philosophers, the atheists, the scientists, the kuffar, because they worship and glorify the intellect and believe that it can arrive at the answers for everything in the universe. We reject that premise. We deny that premise. That is impossible. The intellect does not have the ability to find all of the answers in the universe, because the intellect as a faculty is based only upon the hearing, the seeing, and the heart and the brain, from which included within which is the brain and the heart, in which there is reflection. And so, because there is in the universe that which cannot be seen with those senses and which cannot be heard with those senses, it shows therefore that the aql has been veiled and blinded from seeing that reality. And so therefore, that claim, we don't accept that claim. We do not accept that claim that the aql has the answers to every single thing. And so on that note, this proves therefore that from reason it is to acknowledge the limit of reason. And so therefore we submit, so therefore what the messengers came with in the books of the affairs of the unseen, we believe in those affairs because they are from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so therefore we make taslim, submit, we have iman, faith in these affairs. And with that we'll conclude today's lesson, and we'll continue inshallah in the next lesson to do in speech about the resurrection and the deeds and so on and so forth. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.